It's not our first time. It's actually our first time doing it in person. Right?
It is.
Yeah.
This is
in
cool.
studio.
This is really awkward.
Yeah. This
Is really awkward in person.
We can just instantly stare at you instead of just.
I'm so uncomfortable to have other people in the room and talking to you guys.
I'd much rather look at you on a screen than.
This episode of Bourbon Pursuit is made possible through listeners like you, supported through Patreon, and with partnerships brought to you by the following. Sterling Cut Glass is the official whiskey and tasting glass supplier to distilleries across the country and is also the official glassware of Bourbon Pursuit. They are offering free etched samples to whiskey societies nationwide. Simply email spirits@sterlingcutglass.com, include your logo, and mention Bourbon Pursuit. Take a look at their online catalog with Glencairns, Copitas, rock glasses, decanters, and more at bourbonpursuit.com and click on the banner for Sterling Cut Glass. Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Bourbon Pursuit. And before I get to be a little selfish talking about Patreon and some of the benefits and some of the stuff that's going on, I just need to go through just a few things. First, remember the Kentucky Derby Museum's Legend Series, those tickets are now on sale. So you're going to have Pam and Andrea of Michter's, you're going to have Craft Night featuring Rabbit Hole, Jephthah Creed, and Peerless Founders, as well as Dixon Deadman of Kentucky Out. The first one begins in January, and make sure you go buy your tickets at derbymuseum.org/legend series, where you can see Fred Minnick, one of the members of this team up there, emceeing and sort of leading the discussion. Now, as I'd mentioned, we're going to get a little selfish talking about Patreon because there's a lot of stuff that happened this week. First, all our new t-shirts came in, so anybody that had ordered one through Patreon, I'll be shipping those out relatively soon. Second, if you are even remotely following anybody in whiskey on Instagram, it's hard to miss it. The Kentucky Double. I'm sure you've all seen it by now, but if you haven't, go check it out, thekentuckydouble.com. And it's really a work of art where you can combine favorite two things right now: drinking some bourbon and smoking a nice cigar. However, we had posted on Patreon this past week, and I put some pictures out on Instagram as well, and Facebook, that we have a Bourbon Pursuit branded Kentucky Double that you can purchase for a special Patreon discount, and that's only going to be a limited time offer. So make sure you go to patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit, look for the post so you can get the coupon code to be able to do that. And lastly, just about Patreon in general, I'm excited to actually announce that we have completely sold out of our $50 per month slots that we had available. I mean, I'm blown away. Thank you so much for the support that it takes to build the show and grow on it and everything like that. And we'll evaluate later on if we want to expand that out and maybe add more people in this particular tier. However, until we do that, we're going to make sure that we start getting bottles out of our barrel picks to everybody at this point to make sure everything is about as fair as possible. And lastly, we're going on another barrel pick this week as well. So this week on Tuesday, we had selected out a barrel at New Riff Distilling Company. It's one of those things that you might have seen them around the forums. They've been getting a lot of attention. They're not nationally distributed yet. However, we had the ability to go and get a barrel, and honestly, I'm blown away by it for something that's 4 years old. If you're part of the Patreon community, you can probably get one of these bottles. So make sure you go and you sign up. Again, patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit. Now, today's episode, it's a special one. We have been talking about doing this for a long time, but it just so happened that everybody was in town for Bourbon and Beyond. So we were able to do an in-person roundtable sort of community gathering with everybody here at my house and being able to just kind of talk and really do it in person, right? It was kind of weird, right? At first, like, we don't have to look at each other through cameras when we're doing this. We're actually all together in one place. So it was a really cool opportunity to be able to do that. We also want to say special thank you and shout out to everybody at Bourbon and Beyond who came up and said hi to Ryan and I, or sat in our sessions. It was really cool to be able to kind of listen and speak and shake hands with some of the listeners of this show. It actually always goes a long way to introduce yourself, so we kind of know like the faces behind the listeners that are out there, right? So it's really cool to be able to see that. Now, this episode, as I'd mentioned, we talk a little bit about Bourbon and Beyond. We talk about a little bit of a funny story that happened from the auction. And then we're going to talk about Denny Potter and the Master Distiller shift that's happening between Heaven Hill and Maker's Mark and Jim Beam and how all those things are sort of playing together. And then we kind of wrap it up with a special surprise that Brian from Sippin' Corn brought us, which was a bottle of a 17-year-old Old Taylor. This was something that had originally been distilled at the Old Taylor Distillery at Castle and Key Distillery, and he brought it over as kind of I think it was like a present to himself to be able to do this, but we had the opportunity to try it, so it's really cool. Now, I'm going to go ahead, kick off the show, but I want to say thank you again to Fred Minnick for including us with Bourbon and Beyond. Thank you to everybody that came out. It was an incredible time. It sucks that day 2 is sort of ruined, but it's just the weather. What else can you do about it, right? So make sure you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're more of a video person, check out YouTube and Facebook. And of course, support the show on Patreon if you can. Just a few bucks goes a long way in helping build this community and help build everything that we're doing as well. And if you want the full show notes with links and everything, go to bourbonpursuit.com and subscribe to our emailing list. With that, enjoy this week's episode, and here's Fred Minnick with Above the Char.
I'm Fred Minnick, and this is Above the Char. As I cinched my Bourbon and Beyond ascot, I looked in the mirror, smiled ear to ear, and thought, this is my Super Bowl. For the past year, I curated Bourbon and Beyond, a festival in Louisville, Kentucky that attracts 50,000 people with musical acts such as Lenny Kravitz, John Mayer, Robert Plant, Sting, and iconic celebrity chefs like Top Chef's Tom Colicchio. In this sea of talent, I was the bourbon guy, whose sole job was to pair bourbon with so much beyond. This cool opportunity caught the attention of Forbes, whose headline read, Sting, Lenny Kravitz, ... Fred Minnick, how a Louisville boy became a bourbon headliner. Bourbon and Beyond is bourbon's opportunity to introduce music fans and foodies to not just bourbon, but the culture, lifestyle, and geekiness of our beloved spirit. I am so passionate about bringing new voices to bourbon, such as Uncle Nearest, Fawn Weaver, and Rabbit Hole's Cave Zemanian. And when I was on stage, I relished in the fact that so much youth filled the seats and was stunned to witness brand loyalties. This especially held true in my seminar, Jack and Jim, What's the Difference?, where Jack Daniels, Jeff Arnett, and Jim Beam, Fred No, discussed the differences between Jack Daniels and bourbon. As if it were a political debate, one side was filled with Jack Daniel t-shirts and the other side, Jim Beam, Wild Turkey, Bullet, and many other bourbon brands. It was a fun debate. A lot of fun. Backstage, I was gathering content for a film series you'll learn about later. I tasted bourbon with Master Chef Aaron Sanchez and music icon David Byrne, who's in person exactly like you'd expect him to be, quirky, and you know what? Eager to learn about bourbon. Like I said, this was my Super Bowl, and at halftime, I was winning by a boatload of points. I felt the crowd's energy when on stage and loved seeing every one of my panels, including the Bourbon Pursuit boys, just crush it. I also landed so many cool interviews in my trailer. It was just awesome. But the second half would not happen. Louisville officials canceled the festival due to unsafe grounds that the rain had created. I was defeated, very saddened. Don't get me wrong, I understood the decision. It was raining nonstop and the grounds were largely underwater. It was a soupy mess. There was no way a second day could work. But that single day was absolutely glorious. Bourbon personalities had never seen such a limelight with around such big names. You could say for a moment, we were all singing in the rain with a bourbon in hand. And that's this week's Bourbon Pursuit's Above the Char. Make sure you subscribe to Bourbon Pursuit on iTunes or wherever podcasts can be listened to. Hit me up on Twitter at Fred Minnick, and if you have an idea for Above the Char. Thanks, and see you next week. Cheers.
Welcome back to the 24th edition of the Bourbon Community Roundtable. However, this one is going to be much different than any other one we've done before because we all just happen to be here in Louisville for a particular concert, which we will talk about. And this is the first time we're doing it live. We're all here in person,
in studio.
Our internet friends unite. Yeah, right. Like
They do exist.
And to the dismay of
This
our
is actually
wives.
the first roundtable I've worn pants for, so
Thank you for that.
Yeah, we do appreciate that.
and I'm wearing shorts.
And your broadband's pretty good right now too.
Yeah,
Best it's ever been.
the best internet I've had, and the only one without a screaming baby in the background.
So we'll kind of we'll do as we always do, right?
Yeah.
So Kenny and Ryan here from Bourbon Pursuit leading this on, but we've got the fellows from Breaking Bourbon right next to us too. So actually, this is the first time both of you have been on. You've probably done it once or twice before. Both of you have been
Maybe
on.
once. I think we had to
Yeah,
fill
maybe
in for
once.
somebody missing.
Yeah.
That one time.
Yeah.
But now we get both angles of it. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead. I'll start.
Kick us both
So
off.
I'm Nick. This is Jordan. We're two of the three guys behind Breaking Bourbon. And you can check us out online at breakingbourbon.com. Follow us on social media at Breaking Bourbon. Want to say thank you guys for hosting. Always fun. Always have a good time. I think that's the one thing about bourbon I really like. Because I was asking some people what they hate about bourbon yesterday at the thing we were at the festival. And, it kind of turned into the things we liked about bourbon. So this is really the thing I think I like the most about bourbon is like meeting people that this all kind of came together simply because of our mutual shared interest in bourbon. So glad to be here.
Yep.
Absolutely.
On to me. I'm Blake.
Yeah,
from-
sorry. Game updates, right?
Yeah. No, I was trying to post it to the Facebook group. I'm Blake from bourboner.com. Check me out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I feel like I don't have to give these out when we're all sitting in the same room, but no, happy to be here. So it's fun to actually do one of these in person.
And I'm Brian with Sippin' Corn. Find me on mostly on Twitter, a little bit on Facebook. And November 1st is the release date for Bourbon Justice. It's on a 33% discount right now for pre-order on Amazon.
Super
So
exciting.
Very
everybody
exciting.
get it.
Super exciting.
Looking forward to it.
I
Thanks,
think we
guys.
all are. Yeah. Absolutely. So before we kicking off talking about, because we're all here for Bourbon and Beyond, right? The reason why we're all sitting here today and
It's
we're not
post-mortem.
Yeah, it really is.
This is true. This is true.
What did we do wrong? But really, it was today, the second day, actually got canceled. It was I don't know. It was almost it was like a fortunate of unfortunate things, right? Because like if it was going on today, like we would have gone.
We'd be there.
We'd powered through it, right? Because definitely wanted to be there. I feel bad for these two guys over here that had sessions to be able to give today and workshops, and
I feel bad for the audience, too. They didn't get to
That's
see.
true.
That's true.
This is true.
I feel
That's why
bad.
we're doing this today
Right.
because
I feel
people
really bad for the
left out.
festival because they said they're refunding all the tickets and all the vendors.
Which is
too.
great of the
Yeah.
festival. Which
Right,
is great of the
for sure.
organization, for sure.
But people still traveled here.
Yep.
We
Yeah.
met people from Australia, from Texas.
this is true.
From all over.
It's a big event.
It was
a big
kind of a
event.
relief though when I woke up this morning. I was like, I saw that. I was like, oh, thank God. I can just.
Yeah, I don't know if people weren't there. People know obviously what happened, but the rain, it got so muddy. We were up to our ankles in mud yesterday. It was hard to move around.
Yeah, so for those that weren't there, this is a huge field in Louisville next to the river, and there was a solid, no joke, 4 inches of mud throughout the entire event by the end of the day. And it was one of those areas where your shoes were about to get sucked off each step you took.
I
the
lost,
thing is,
I lost
I don't
one.
think-
I had to like go back and
almost-
fish it out. Yeah, it was pretty bad.
I don't think most people were prepared for that
No.
because the weather forecast said from like 3 to 6 there was like 30% chance of drizzle
until that morning.
Well, it was not a drizzle.
A little more than a drizzle.
It was like 4 inches of rain, and
And it was nonstop.
yeah,
I mean,
it was like Derby this year. It just never stopped raining.
It was pretty bad. However, I think the best part was how unprepared Blake came because he came and he's got his white Vineyard Vines polo on. So he's got his white polo on. And then,
This was a wet t-shirt contest that was
and then he's got his leather loafers. And I don't. Were they toss away? Like are they gone?
So it's a TBD on the leather loafers. I washed them off in the shower last night, and we'll see what happens when I get home. I like get get room keeping to give me a plastic bags to pack them away in. So, fingers crossed. Hopefully they survive. But
Tiffany's shoes did not. My wife's. I checked those as soon as we got home.
You got to tell everybody the backstory that doesn't know about it.
So, well,
tell
I
them
know
who Tiffany
she's
is.
not going to listen to
Tell
this,
her. Tell us who Tiffany is too, right?
So Tiffany is my wife. She was coming to meet us at the event. I kind of texted her. I'm like, hey, it's really rainy, muddy. I call her on the phone. I'm like, probably want to wear your hunter boots. She was like, well, I've already left. Well, she shows up and she's like got these wedge sandals on and like wearing a skirt and no raincoat. And I'm like, oh God, you're gonna have a bad time. I'm fucked.
yeah.
But no,
This is
she
not gonna
powered
go
through. At first, she was like, oh man, she about fell on the way there, but I think the blueberry brandy cocktails at the Bald and Bond tent helped her embrace it a little more.
is fair.
But
Okay, but before we get into more of the festival, right? I want to talk about Friday night, right?
yeah.
So Blake, Ryan, and myself. So anybody that was hopefully been paying attention, right? We've been talking about this Art of Bourbon rare auction that was going on at the Speed Art Museum to benefit. That was also part of the Bourbon and Beyond. I guess you can say warm up, pre-party, whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And so we got one funny story out of it. But anybody that was not paying attention to some of the social media, there were some high dollar bottles that went off. Granted, it's all for charity, right? It's going to the right cause. For anybody that does want to know, that number 10 bottle of Pappy Van Winkle 23 actually sold for $19,500 back to Julian, right? So he ended up buying it back,
And
right?
this is the literal 10th bottle ever bottled of Pappy 23. This isn't just like, the 10th year or 10th edition, the 10th bottle.
And he already owns 1 through 9, right? So he had all 10. And
No, actually.
no, he
so
gave-
1 through
Yeah.
5 was family. And then 6 through 10 was just...
This guy who donated them, I don't think they're revealing the name. But
so Julian didn't donate it.
No.
He bought it.
He bought it back
bought it
into the
back.
family.
He's
I
got to
see.
play by the same rules as the rest of us. It's hard to get those old bottles.
I couldn't tell if he pulled the Sazerac credit card or the Van Winkle credit card. I was trying to get a name on that one, but just kidding.
Do you want to tell your story about how one time you
So
actually got to
I'm-
hold this bottle?
I'm actually didn't even get to hold it because it never came up here. I'm really bitter about this one because about 4 years ago, the guy who subsequently donated the bottles emailed me through Bourboner and was like, hey, I've got these bottles, you're interested? And we're looking back at pictures. He wanted $4,500 for 3 of these bottles, and one of them being the 10th. Yeah, so
All right.
a little over whatever the math is, 70 or my brain's dead. So 1,400 a piece.
Okay, yeah.
hopefully
So-
you're not his accountant.
Yeah. I use a calculator. We're good. No, so about 1,400 a piece, and I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden it's like, if I spend $4,500 on bourbon, my wife literally will kill me. Like, I can't do this for 3 bottles, and ended up backing out. And now looking back, that one bottle went for $19,000. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like, well, maybe that would have been a decent investment.
Yeah, right.
Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
Don't be too hard on yourself.
No,
Right, but that was one funny story. But here's another funny story. So I kind of wish. So Fred was going to actually join us today, but he couldn't. He actually had to just leave to go back on site. But I kind of want to get his perspective from his viewpoint angle. So this is sort of how it went down, right? And to kind of put the cart before the horse, Blake, Ryan, and myself actually backed out of the highest bid on one of the auctions.
And by backed out,
Yeah.
I pretended like I didn't know these
they're
guys
like,
so quick. I'm like, huh? Who are these?
I was like, that was not me. And don't do this.
Wrong paddle.
All right,
They're
so
like, what's your number? And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. They look at all 3 of us and say, which number do you want to use? None of them.
We looked at each other. Nobody said a word.
Denny's.
But
So here's the story,
give the
right?
story.
Yeah. So the story is that they've got this whole line of auction items, but one of them, it was a bottle of William Weller, a bottle of George T. Stagg, and a barrel of Antique 107. And we're sitting there looking at each other. And Ryan kind of knew about this ahead of time because they did a similar auction not too long ago where that barrel and everything went for about $30,000. Right. And we already knew, like, well, we're not going to go that high. But we kind of looked at each other and said, like,
what's our max price?
what's our
We're gonna
max
do
price?
this.
Like, and like that we could bring more people onto this or whatever it is that makes it, basically like maybe just a little bit less than secondary that we could, help people out and, you can get these bottles. But anyway, we were I think we said like 15 was like our
15,000
max,
was
right?
our-
15's
yep.
our max. Like after that we're out. And so it starts going, right? Like off the bat it's like 1,000, 2,000, and then Ryan's just holding his paddle up.
Doesn't even get up full time.
Doesn't even
He
take it down.
goes, you're in first and second.
Yeah, so they get to about 11,000, 12,000. And then they're going around and they're going 13, anybody want 13, anybody 13. And then I think Fred finally realizes, he goes, oh shit, these guys are the ones bidding on it.
Yeah, and so by the grace of God.
Yeah,
These morons didn't read the fine print, apparently.
because what he had to come in, he had to clarify. He goes, this is not for the entire barrel, it's the opportunity to purchase the barrel. So you actually have to buy the extra barrel, which is another probably 7 to 10,000,
Yeah.
whatever
But
it is.
it did not say that anywhere
No.
in the
In our
booklet.
defense,
I mean,
that was never mentioned
no,
in any of
it
the
didn't say it before it
material.
went off. It didn't say in the printed material. I mean, it was very misleading.
Yes.
Yeah, that's arguably a very material state,
Yeah.
right? We have an
Well,
attorney
and of
here.
course,
Yeah.
so
Thankfully.
we have this object. We're like, we're out, and so like, but they didn't like hear us or like didn't want to acknowledge that we said we're
They
out.
basically
You said we're out, and you were waving your number, right?
No, I was like, I'm putting my number under my ass. So I don't, but so then they're like trying to make us feel like, come on, God. I mean, this is all for charity, you know. Like I'm like, I'm like, this is getting really awkward. My heart is pounding. I'm sweating, like panic. And they're like, oh, and then so they're doing 11, and they're like, sold. And they're like,
And we were like, no.
No.
Like, we're like putting our hands across our necks, like, no, retract. Like, we want out of this.
And then, like, they
then
go-
people start swarming our table. They're like, so is there a problem? Like, what? what
no.
what should
First
we
they
do?
go, what number do y'all want to use? There's like 3 of y'all. Which one? Or is that what y'all are trying to decide? We're like, no, we're we're not buying this.
So I don't think we talked about it. Well, I'm curious, what did it end up going for?
It ended up actually going for, I think,
I don't know.
6.5.
I was so thrown off by
right.
that point. I
know.
So what'd they do? Just start bidding again?
Well, they actually they looked at
restarted.
us. They looked at us and they said, "Well, you were the ones bidding. Like, where would you like to start it back from?" And we're like,
Zero.
Like, we're done. Like, we're out of this thing.
Not even
right?
buying it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, it ended up going for 6.5, which in hindsight
still not
probably isn't
bad.
probably a pretty,
Yeah.
ended up being a
So that
probably pretty
probably
big deal.
equal- yeah, that's
That makes
only
sense.
a little bit over what you're.
because you're probably getting about 180 bottles.
Yeah, so it actually
Bottle
probably
is-
would have been a pretty good deal to get it at 6.5. But
Yeah.
I don't. At that point, we
Mortified.
felt this A, sense of relief. B, we were like, Fred's gonna talk to us afterwards, and he's gonna be like, "You guys embarrassed me." Like,
We just said, okay, we'll pay $12,000. Just kidding, but we will pay $6,000. You can't retract and then bid again.
Yeah, I
That just
know,
doesn't
right?
look
Well,
good
it's Fred's
in
fault.
general.
Before we walked in, he goes, make sure you bid on something.
We're trying to,
Well, you did.
yeah. And then I would think the only person that I think that also got maybe the deal of the night was that it was the first Heaven Hill 27 year to actually kind of go out there, right? That's something that's gonna be a $400 retail bottle. Ended up going for $2,200, I think is what it was, and because nobody knows really where that's gonna end up right now. Like that could be a $1,500 bottle, that could be a $3,000 bottle.
Yep.
So we'll see what the market determines, but I think that person maybe had one of the better takeaways.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't others.
somebody asked about what other bottles. So there was an Albert Blanton's from, I think it was
52.
52,
Yeah.
which
Albert
was really
himself
cool.
picked.
Yeah. And then just some other.
That was 10,000, right?
Yeah, it went for 10,000.
Yeah.
Actually sold to the people that own Jephthah Creed. They bought that one.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
There was like some Old Forester presidential.
It was the-
Yeah, there's an Old Forester barrel selection.
Yeah, the barrel actually went for 21,000. I believe that went back to the old Forester
Wow.
people.
and a bottle of regular old Blanton's went for what?
700 or 800.
700 or 800?
Just a regular bottle of Blanton's.
Yeah, which is.
Watch
There were-
the prices on Blanton's.
There were a few of those where it's like, I guess they're just doing that to.
a tax
there was an
write-off.
Old Weller original from, I think that was the 50s as well that went.
Yeah, it went for like 5 or 6, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And
Is
then
it a pint or
yeah,
yeah?
Yeah,
that's
but
the pint,
like I
isn't it?
said, I think
Small bottle.
Yeah.
it was fun. I think for anybody, and the auction, the prices are asinine, but it's all for charity. Like it's just an opportunity for people to kind of throw some money around. But I'll say from an entertainment perspective, I loved it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the auctioneer was great.
It was great.
Fred was great, commenting on each bottle about it,
And it went fast.
Yeah.
Like 37 auctions went in an hour and a half. Like it was
Those
fast.
can go so slow sometimes.
Oh, it was fast.
And it
kept
was
it
online
rolling.
too, wasn't it? People could put in bids from
Right.
online.
So they started out with high bids, a lot of those things, except for
Right.
like the Limestone Branch I saw pre-auction was like $100 only.
Yeah, there was
What did that end up going for? Any memory?
I can't remember.
Spend
was
a day-
our table.
spend a day at
More than
Limestone
$100.
Branch.
that was
It was
right after the
$100.
Weller, so it just
Right.
went downhill
It
from
was a
there.
blur after that.
It was so long ago. But anyway, so let's kind of talk a little bit about Bourbon and Beyond, right? You know, I think the highlight, not the highlight, maybe the low light was all the damn weather in the mud, right?
I
like
think
that
that's
was
the headline. Unfortunately,
that was the unfortunate
weather.
headline.
Yep.
But you know, in regards of, we'll just talk about the bourbon experience, right? Because that's really what we were there for. Music was great for anybody that was just
Lenny
wanting to
Kravitz rocks.
Yeah, I mean, we
Yep.
He was fantastic
He was great.
live.
so music, there's enough to say about that, but the bourbon stuff, the Bourbon Plus workshops that were going on, I was highly impressed with how well it went down. You know, and kudos to Fred for putting everything together. I think
he did a great
Absolutely.
job.
I
Great
think
job.
it was very professional. Everything was done very, very well. It catered to multiple types of audiences that were there too, because you had some 101 level stuff, and then you had some 201 sort of stuff too. And so, and you got a good mix of the crowd, right? And I think the other cool thing is by the time Ryan went on, because Ryan's session was at 6 p.m., people were a little toasted by then.
Yeah, so my audience was rowdy, and I was
more
like,
lively.
I loved it. They're like, woo! And I'm like, thank you. It's making it so much easier. And I think, honestly, I had quite a buzz too when I was going on.
Yeah, I'm being honest.
Yeah, but he came out and like the crowd's cheering, like you introduced Marianne and everybody's going crazy,
Yeah.
and then it was almost like everybody had like pockets of fan clubs, right? Because when John Foster of Smooth Ambler went, you like see all the people in Smooth Ambler in the back like going crazy, so it was fun
And
to
John
see.
Foster, I mean, that was awesome right there. I mean, he was very animated, very outspoken. I mean, that was really cool. I
He's
thought-
a cool guy.
Yeah.
He's a cool guy. He's a nice
Yeah,
guy.
he was direct, very
they did
straightforward.
Yeah, it was
laid it right out
wasn't,
there.
like, really your typical PR answer.
Yeah, there wasn't a public relations person there like honing
there
him
was no
in.
filter on him.
Yeah, that was unfiltered. He cut right through the bullshit. That was great. I think from the experience being in the audience and even not just viewing the actual workshops and things like that, but just, you know, all these people that are these, you know, bourbon stars, bourbon celebrities, people in the industry that you hear about, you read about, you know, you see, you're interacting with, you know, they're just regular
great.
people getting a drink with you type of thing, which
Yep.
I thought that was a fantastic aspect of the event as well.
Yep. So for those who didn't attend, right? So there was a stage set up. There's two different stages. One just did pure bourbon talks that, you know, Kenny and Ryan and Blake and Brian was going to do and stay moderated these talks, which were awesome. There's another one that incorporated celebrity chefs in bourbon. But then throughout the festival, they had these great activations, right? There's the Big Bar, Big Bourbon Bar, with just tons of cool cocktails, tons of Master Distillers hanging out. You can just grab drinks with them. Jack Daniels had a cool thing. There's
They had a
college
huge
football
tent.
games going on in there. But the moral of the story, there was just so much different bourbon and cocktails and so
Yeah.
many opportunities. To
I couldn't
just-
even make it to 10%
Right.
of it.
Yeah.
You know, because
It was-
there's
it
so
was
much to offer.
huge.
You're
And we
like-
talked with a ton of fans. We talked with a ton of Master Distillers. It was a really fun time, right? It was
Yeah.
just a really, if you get a chance to come down next year to this event, please make sure to go do it, because it is, if you like bourbon, it is just awesome. Weather
Yeah.
aside, it was an awesome event.
And
Yeah.
I think even if you're not necessarily into bourbon, you know, it's
there's
something
something
that's
for
got
everyone.
it for everybody, where you could, not to say avoid the bourbon, but you certainly don't have to get it all geeky in bourbon to enjoy it. I think that was probably the majority of the people there were really there just for the entertainment aspect.
Oh, yeah.
And
The
bourbon
lineup was
a-
so good that
a
it's
secondary
gonna draw
thing.
everybody.
I think
that
it's
just-
funny, like in Kenny's seminar, which you did an excellent job, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
But, you know, they give you samples of each. And I think there were some people that sat on the seminar that probably like didn't realize what they were drinking. And they're like, they're taking it, they're like, oh gosh, this is like strong. And you know, there's
It's
a
a
lot of,
117 proof
you're
Willet,
like, you
right?
got
Yeah.
Willets. I mean, you got some great whiskeys here. You're
Yep.
leaving on the table. But
Like, oh, I want some a little smoother. Like, no, dude, enjoy what you got.
Yeah, like the first session. So what happened was Blake and I were invited to help sit on a session because Jimmy Russell's sister passed away, and so the Russells couldn't make it to it, so they had to do a kind of a stand-in Wild Turkey tribute, right? And just talking about the whiskey in itself.
They dug deep and got Kenny and Blake.
I was going to say, talk about the ultimate disappointment. You show up to see Jimmy and Eddie Russell, and then it's me and Kenny sitting up there in matching shirts.
But, just talking about the whiskey in general, like, they were pouring out, 17-year Master's Keep? Is that what
17
they
years Master Keep they had for us.
Yeah, and that's what they were pouring out. Like, it was like, you wouldn't necessarily see that. Like, you'd think they were pouring out like 101 or Rare Breed or something, right? But that's...
The great thing, though, with all these sessions was they were free, right? So once you're in the festival, if you wanted to go attend one of these, you totally could, which was great. There's no upcharge, no nothing. So people were lining up, doing a ton of different talks, tasting a ton of different things, which I thought was great, right? You could really experience a lot for free.
It was a
once
great
you're there.
setup.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Which that part I didn't even realize until I got there of like, oh, you just line up for
Just
whatever you
line
want
up.
to do and go. Because like even like some of the food and cocktail things, I'm like, all right, so what do I need to sign up? Like, no, just go on in.
Yeah, first come, first serve. Whoever wants to sit.
Dang, this is pretty sweet.
Yeah.
And to that end, too, it was first come, first serve, though, too. So if you wanted to be sitting at tables where there was the wild
samples.
Gotta
turkey sample,
line up.
you had to be in the first group of whatever it was.
I think there were
50.
30 seats.
Is that what it was? About 30 seats. Everyone else would kind of fill in the back. So you did have to get maybe,
Well, you had a game- you had a
20,
game
30
plan.
minutes ahead of those to be the ones you really want to see and be on top of. But I don't think that bothered anybody. And people who were standing in the back, we were in the back, I think, for the majority of them, hanging out with Master Distillers and people like that.
Yeah, I
It
think
was a lot of fun.
I think there's actually potential for growth there. They could double the size of those seats.
easily.
Absolutely.
Easily.
Easily fill them too.
Yeah.
Easily.
They can
wouldn't
make
be
it
surprised to
probably
see that
100
next
people
year.
and
It could
probably
be as
get
big
close
as
to-
the chef one,
Right.
the mash stage.
Yeah, yeah.
They had about double the seats, and they were filled, and then you could easily fill the workshop stage
Yeah,
too.
Yeah.
100%.
Absolutely. So, any other kind of thoughts on Bourbon and Beyond before we Brian still got his wristband on. I think he still hopes that.
Yeah,
Still
like,
on the
I'm
drive.
he's no-
pretending today
the phone call's
that
gonna
I'm
come.
still
Yeah.
there, so I've got my special wristband on and just wishing I get the call, but I'm not.
So Brian missed his session, right? And I was really looking forward to that
So,
session.
Yeah, we were
I was
too.
going to do a session on barrel finishing, and we were going to have a great panel of Master Distillers plus Angry Orchard because they've got now a product.
Oh,
that
that's
they
right.
are,
Well, we
that
can
they're
act like
aging.
we're the Master Distiller.
Yeah, so we'll go around.
Let's do
I
it.
call being the Angry Orchard guy. I've
Okay,
seen his
yeah.
commercials.
So that's definitely the beyond part of it, and I think that shows how far bourbon has come.
Yeah.
and it's in every area now, and ciders are now aged in bourbon barrels. So,
Well, give us
I
a
think it's a good
teaser.
sign.
Give us a question you were going to ask. Give us the hardest question that you were going to ask.
well, I was going to ask Wes Henderson if he was really selling bourbon because I know he is. He's a little. He's
Wow.
a little. He's sensitive to that because there are some purists who say as soon as you finish a bourbon in a secondary barrel, it's not bourbon anymore because you can't have any flavoring additives. All you're supposed to have is your first time use charred oak barrel and your yeast and your mash bill and all those things to give the flavor. You can't flavor it with anything else. And there's a lot of purists who say putting staves in it like Maker's 46 or putting it in a brand new barrel, whether it's port like Angel's Envy does a lot or sherry or whatever else, means it's not bourbon anymore. Now, TTB lets you say bourbon finished in.
Yep.
So TTB isn't as much of a stickler as a lot of purists are. But he's a little touchy on that subject. So I wanted to see
a lot of
what he'd
these
say to
guys
that.
are touchy on any.
All right, let's make
Going
this
right
fun.
for the jugular.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
No.
First question of the day. Welcome, everyone. Go.
Wes, you don't sell bourbon.
Yeah.
Now, is it fair to have you answer your own question and say, what do you think about how it's labeled,
Yeah.
what the TTB allows?
What, to have Wes answer that?
No, I mean,
No,
sure.
sure.
Oh,
Sure.
yeah.
Like-
No, yeah, I think that's fine. As long as it's transparent. I mean,
Sure.
So as long as you say bourbon finished in, you got to. As long as you disclose that, as long as you don't count the the finishing time in your age statement, if you have an age statement, then you're transparent. You're telling consumers exactly what it is that you're selling.
And I think
that's
I'd
fine.
rather know that because
Right.
I think if it's a bourbon finished in versus a whiskey, just whiskey, could be
Right.
anything, malt whiskey, I don't know. I want to know that because I have at least some idea of what the flavor profile might lean towards, as opposed to kind of just a labeled whiskey.
Right.
Really
just
no
whiskey.
idea.
Are you
have
just
to
going to call
try
it whiskey?
it to
So
know.
it's more transparent to be able to say that you've started with bourbon and then you've finished it in something else. So it's. I know Scotch has gone through that issue too about what they can't put on their bottles anymore, and it's actually less transparent on some of those Scotch laws. because of what they can't say. So I like to be able to say it's bourbon finished in whatever kind of barrel it is.
Yeah.
You can't really share any more information.
Yeah, there's nothing. Yeah, that's what it is.
What else do you want to know?
Exactly what's in the bottle, and that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, I think Wes probably would have been fine. He probably does well underneath the gun, and sure it's not the first time he's gotten that one, so I'm sure he'd be doing great.
He'd be fine. Yeah.
Blake, what was your session going to be on today?
So mine was about Master Distillers. So it was.
It was actually the opposite of that. We don't need no Master Distillers.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's I was basically saying what it was. We don't need no stinking Master Distillers was the name of it. Talked about the Master Distiller's role, and I've talked to a bunch of Master Distillers in preparation for this, and usually the answer I get is, what is your role? And it's one day I could be meeting with the investors, the corporate guys. The next day it could be meeting with marketing to plan out new products, and then the third day I could be scrubbing dirt off of off of machinery in the corners. So it's very broad. It's a little bit of everything. There's not one specific task essentially, but it's kind of like it's bringing the entire production process together. So it would have been really cool. Would have liked to hear from Jim Rutledge a lot. He was on the panel, and then Kava from Rabbit Hole Distilling, and so really
they're big on that. That's what they kind of preach, is that we don't need a master distiller, right? Rabbit Hole. It's more of a team effort than just one person.
Just respect the process.
And I would agree that it is it is a team effort at the end of the day. I think you do kind of need that head to kind of lead the team as well. I think it plays a big role.
But I think anymore, master distiller is probably like more of a figurehead, like something that somebody can connect the brand to more than just like an operations manager, I guess.
Yeah, and that's where it's interesting. In the U.S., we focus more on the master distiller. We're in Canada and Scotland, especially, they focus more on like the master blender, master taster. And the master distiller is not, it's an important role, but it's not how we kind of lift them up, and that's who we send out to tastings and all that.
I mean, you're starting to kind of see that though when you think about like barrel bourbon, right? And think of Tripp, being the master blender versus an actual distiller, and you're starting to see more and more of that come around versus having, that could be the figurehead if you want, right? And kind of make it into the American market.
It's nice to have Rutledge, to have heard him, because he
heard
fulfilled
from him.
both roles.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, he is a genius at blending with their 10 recipes, but he knew exactly how that his still was fine-tuned, and he was a genius on both ends.
And so that was going to be one of the questions, actually, was whenever he was there, was he essentially both roles and just kind of like the master man at Four Roses, or even though as master distiller, he really did. I mean, I think he had heavy influence. Do they have a master blender at Four Roses?
I mean, I know Brent still takes part in the small batch releases and everything like that. So
it's him. And
it was probably
he's got a panel.
It was. I'm sure when Rutledge was leaving, they're like, okay, we need to put together a job description of what the next person we need to do. So he probably just had to
Here's the list.
Yeah.
I did ask Brent that how it transitioned. He's like, basically I do everything I used to do, and just they added some more tasks to it.
And no pay raise.
He told us a story about one of the small batches. I think it might have been Four Roses Limited Edition 2014, that they were really back and forth on. Don't quote me on the exact year, because it may have been a different year. But he kept coming back to Jim with recipes, and Jim kind of was like, no, it's not really there yet. So I guess there was a little bit of a struggle at that point with kind of the agreement on which one it was going to be. But if I remember correctly, it was, Jim really had final say. So it's like ultimately he's got to be happy with it.
Right.
So in talking with Brent too about coming up with like Elliot's Select, his first, here you're a master distiller and you're going to have to put out a bourbon with your image on it. That's the first thing people are going to recognize you that probably forever.
You got to put your face on a bottle. That's
put
weird,
your face
right?
on a bottle, right? So I remember him talking about how nervous he was about it. That he was between a few different runs of barrels, and do I go this way or that way? So that pressure, ultimately has got to fall on somebody. Somebody ultimately is going to make that decision. So I think that master distiller, they still lead, they still make the decision, regardless of if they're pulling knobs or whatever they're doing, on the day-to-day. Ultimately, they are kind of leading that ship. so to speak. So I think that you see that role whether they're idolized and brought to celebrity and marketing or not.
Marion Barnes actually talked about that in I guess it was Ryan's session yesterday, saying like how much pressure there was about putting together all these releases, and at the end of the day, it does fall on their shoulders a little bit. So maybe I would take a team effort.
They're
in
the
that
ones
case.
signing off, right? Yeah, they're the ones signing off.
It wasn't my fault. It was the team's.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no way to shift the blame to anybody other than yourself, right? So that's
Unlike Rick Pitino, who never takes the blame.
Shots fired.
Yeah, really taking one to the gut there for some people.
sorry.
It's all right. But that's actually a pretty good segue into our next subject, talking about Master Distillers. But before we do that, I wanted to say first off, shout out to Jane and Larry Rice, Jane Bowie of Maker's Mark, Larry Rice of Silver Dollar, as well as Drew from Willett. Thank you again for joining in my session where we talked about just rare whiskey, which was vintage whiskey and single barrels, and then Ryan had his audacity of source whiskey topic. So hopefully we will get to submit new topics again for next year and be able to bring some more fun discussions.
It was
really
a lot of fun because we sit around and talk about these, and we have interesting questions amongst us. But usually when we interview master distillers in a traditional setting, you got a PR person, and like there's only so much you can talk about. But here we were kind of like given free reign to do whatever, and it was funny. Like in my session, like how each brand would like defend themselves and like try to like stand above the other people. It was pretty cool.
They try to like skirt their way. Like, this is what we do differently.
Yeah, right.
There's definitely
This is
some
why we're
jockeying.
better.
Yeah, for sure.
For
sure.
It was
nice
a
to see.
dynamic, a little bit of
For sure.
Yeah. And then you had, like you said, their crowd was back there screaming hoot
Yeah,
hollers.
they had their
Pretty
fans.
cool.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Another quick shout out before we move on. I just saw G to the M. So he's from Belgium, watching live for the first time. So welcome to all of our international viewers who can catch us at an earlier time in the day.
International
normal.
viewing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there you go.
right. Yeah, it's, well, I mean,
Big
it's
time now.
All two of you.
2:15 Eastern on a Sunday, right?
Right,
It's-
what else are you gonna do?
It's a good deal. So this was kind of, like I said, we talked about Master Distillers, but this kind of leads into a lot of the big news from last week. Like the biggest news from last week, there's almost like two. I don't know if Sazerac came out and said, here's the BTAC list, and then Maker's Mark is like, here, hold my bourbon, watch this. And so, of course, a lot of the news from BTAC was released, or BTAC. We've had those conversations before.
Yeah.
We can maybe get to that here in a little bit, but really the topic of conversation was talking about the Master Distiller shift that's starting to happen. So Denny Potter, who had been the Master Distiller at Heaven Hill for almost, I think he was 10 years, maybe just a little bit longer than that. Not even just the Master Distiller, he was also the Director of Operations. He had actually worked Maker's Mark prior to that, but he announced, or I think Maker's actually kind of announced for him last week, that he is going to be taking Greg Davis's role as the Master Distiller at Maker's Mark. Greg Davis is being moved over to somewhere to look at operations at
It's one of the Beam distilleries.
one of the Beam distilleries, right?
I guess it's
Right.
Claremont, or is it
Frankfurt,
Boston or
maybe.
Claremont?
Might be.
Well, they
We probably should have researched this before.
I want to say Boston. I want to say Boston.
They only have two. I think
Somebody
the
watching
Booker
will
No
look it
plant
up
and the
and
one
drop
in
it.
Yeah,
in
and
Boston
it's
or
the Booker No
Claremont. And
plant,
then
so
Frankfurt's
which is
bottling.
Boston.
I think Boston.
Right,
Yeah,
so
so maybe it is
Boston.
Boston. then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Boston,
Anyway.
Massachusetts.
Yeah. Austin, Massachusetts.
So anyway, everybody's getting promoted around here, right? That's kind of seems what be happening. So I kind of want to push. I have a little bit of an inside view into this, and kind of know some of the reasons why he went over. But another reason why I kind of look at this too is that he might have been pigeonholed over at Heaven Hill, right? Like there's not. It's a family company.
Yep.
He probably hit the highest in the echelon he could probably get, right? So he probably made a pretty good move by being able to go to a company that's global. I know a lot of people were looking at it and be like, why would somebody make a lateral move? And maybe in some people's minds, they're like, that might even be like maybe just a step down to go from Director of Operations just to something that's Master Distiller. However, I don't necessarily see it like that, because we were talking about earlier, right? They're public figures, they're faces. And one thing Denny has always done very well is he can talk, right? And he knows his shit, right? So he's very good at both those things. But I kind of want to get your all's take on, moving over. Was it a good move? Is anybody going to sit here and say like he probably should have stayed? Like what are your all's thoughts? This episode of Bourbon Pursuit is made possible through listeners like you, supported through Patreon, and with partnerships brought to you by the following. Sterling Cut Glass is the official whiskey and tasting glass supplier to distilleries across the country and is also the official glassware of Bourbon Pursuit. Sterling has contracted with the finest European crystal factories to bring the best quality glassware into their Kentucky warehouse and production facility. If you've been following us on social media, you'll see how their deep etched glassware is truly the best in the industry. I know because I searched up and down the internet to find out who was the best. Come to find out, Sterling Cut Glass supplies almost all the distilleries on the Bourbon Trail, and they're also the official glassware of the PGA Tournament and the Kentucky Derby. Make your logo shine on Capita nosing glasses, Glencairns, neat tasters, rocks, tumblers, and more. They're offering free etched samples to whiskey societies nationwide. Simply email spirits@sterlingcutglass.com, include your logo, and mention Bourbon Pursuit. Take a look at their online catalog by going to bourbonpursuit.com and clicking on the banner for Sterling Cut Glass. But I kind of want to get your all's take on, moving over. Was it a good move? Is anybody going to sit here and say, like, he probably should have stayed? Like, what are your all's thoughts?
Here's my thought, and this is purely speculation. And, like, I don't know. I thought about this because I thought the same thing. Yes, it's a bigger company, bigger stage. But I think the way Heaven Hill has just been operating the past couple of years, I think maybe they might be getting ready to package to sell it soon. I don't know. Purely speculation, and maybe that had something to do with it. He kind of saw that on the horizon, but I don't know.
Because he heard it here first.
He didn't. Wow.
I'm just
Purely speculation here first.
Speculation.
I mean, my wife works there. I don't see any stock options that come in. Right? There's no ownership except from the family. Right? So who knows? They could be looking.
I mean,
for a
it's
cash
no
out.
bigger time than now for their brand in bourbon right now. So I mean, who knows?
We
true.
really haven't seen another massive acquisition like that in a long time. I mean, who would have been the last makers? The last
Beam when they got.
But they were been private for a while, or I guess the Suntory would have been.
That's what I'm talking about. Yep.
Right.
Beam Suntory. That was
Yeah, no, that's true. I didn't think about that. But
Yep.
ultimately, I mean, I think time will tell. But Heaven Hill, they're kind of a funny one. I feel like they're doing a lot recently, but in a lot of ways, they still seem a little bit behind the eight ball on like things like social media. Like I think they got a Twitter account 2 months ago or something.
That's true.
And
That's true.
So I don't know. Who knows what actually happens behind there? Heaven Hill still produces a ton of great bourbon. But I mean, we've all kind of dealt with them on like media side and everything. And I feel like for the first 3 years of Bourboner, I could never get a hold of anyone over there.
Yeah, that's true.
And then all of a sudden you get one person, and I understand that for the smaller companies, but for the second largest producer of bourbon, or maybe
They're still second, the Beam. They have the second most
largest producer of bourbon. You kind of would think they'd have some of that other stuff set up. So, I mean, it's a big win for Maker's Mark. Denny, he really knows his stuff. If you've ever listened to the Bourbon Pursuit podcast where he talks about everything, but no, so I think it'll be good. It'll be interesting to see who fills his role at Heaven Hill now. So we can speculate on that as well.
Yeah.
I put my resume in, haven't heard back yet. So,
Still pending.
still pending.
I will say, and I don't know if this is just a personal feeling for what I feel like I'm subjected to in terms of marketing and that kind of thing from the big Kentucky distillers, but I feel like both Maker's Mark and Heaven Hill are two that I don't really feel like the Master Distiller is put forward as a face as much as, say, I mean, the big one is, of course, Wild Turkey with the Russells.
Right.
You know, labels, name, very
Maker's
much
Mark,
in
they're
that.
just like a plug and play. Like, we've been doing the same thing.
Yes.
Consistency. Like,
Very-
no
very
matter who
good
it is,
marketing.
it's going to be the...
And they've
clean
had
marketing.
distillers come and go that
They
people
have.
They
don't
do
really
that. You're
realize.
like, oh, wait, I didn't even realize that that was a distiller there not that long ago.
Right.
You know, that person. So that's interesting that maybe there's going to be a shift at that in this point. Maybe we'll see more of a, hey, we're highlighting,
instead of the same
Denny
hills,
instead of
maybe
just, here's bottles doing fancy things on social media. We might see something change a little bit there.
Now, what's everyone's thoughts about Makers being the best known wheated bourbon, and Heaven Hill having challenges with their wheated bourbons?
That's an interesting take. I mean, I will say that one of the best weeded whiskeys that I had was Parker's
Right.
a few years ago.
Weeded,
right?
yeah,
Absolutely.
weeded whiskey.
That was a weeded
The
whiskey.
13-year weeded whiskey.
And you
that was
are right when it
fantastic.
comes to a bourbon, they really don't shine, right? Because you've got Bernheim, which is still a weeded whiskey. It's not a bourbon, right?
Then you've got Larceny.
Yes.
And you've got what, other than the decanter series, you've got Old Fitzgerald, which is, what is it, $12? I mean, it's bottom shelf whiskey now.
I think people like larceny, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
people are
larceny
often
is a
saying,
big brand
yes,
for
larceny is something you
Larceny has
should
a
try.
following.
It's a good alternative. It's under $30, usually.
They've got a lot of marketing budget
Right.
behind it too, so
They do.
it does
Yep.
hit a very wide audience, and plus the bottle design and everything when they launched that just a few years ago, right? That that was sort of their way that they're trying to tackle a younger market too,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I think move away from Old Fitzgerald.
Oh,
That's it.
yeah.
Yeah, for
Right,
sure.
that
Right.
was the idea.
For sure.
But Makers is so iconic, though.
Right.
It's hard to everybody when you think of bourbon. Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Oh, Maker's Mark. Even people that don't know bourbon,
And it has
they
a
know Maker's Mark.
Yeah, strong international presence too,
Right.
right? Which is what you don't have with Heaven Hill products.
Because I'll tell people from out, I'll be like, they'll ask me about bourbon. I'm like, if you can find like Evan Williams 17, they're like, what? What is that? And I'm like, you haven't heard of that? And they're like, Makers, they totally
That's
know.
it.
Makers
Yep.
and like Knob Creek, that's those big
they can
brands.
find it.
that-
You can
yeah.
tell anyone in the world.
Makers was smart to trademark that trip.
Yeah.
That's all I
Yeah,
can
they-
say is that
Absolutely.
very smart to do.
Yeah.
Do you mention that in Bourbon Justice, by the way?
It might be in there.
that. Little teaser.
Yeah,
Find
it was
out.
funny.
Teaser. Find out on November
That or
1st.
more.
It was funny at that auction, Julian, it had a wax top, and he was like, yeah, I dipped this wax, but I made sure there was no drip.
Good.
So the other thing that I like about Denny going over to Makers is I think that next time we have him on the podcast, he can actually be a little bit more of himself. So anybody that's ever actually talked to Denny or knows Denny, he is going to fit very well in with the No family because he cusses a lot, right? And every single time that we've ever interviewed over there, like there's always a PR person in the room. So it's kind of like he had this somebody over his shoulder,
Yeah.
right? Like making sure he said the same, which is
It's the
fair.
refined version.
Which is fair, right?
Yep.
It's understandable. However, I think going over to this side of the house where you know how the No's act. I don't think that
Bill Samuels he
doesn't have to really hold back.
legendary stories
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That
Right.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So he's not really have to hold back, right? But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I am certain that we're going to find out news here in the next week or two of what's going to happen to Heaven Hill because I'm sure that.
They need somebody there.
Can't leave that hole open long.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is that we've had the opportunity to go and visit Bernheim, and they've got a lot of people. We've talked about it before, right? Like it's more or less a face of the brand.
Yeah.
The amount of
There's
time that they're
people in
actually
operations that they're doing just fine. Without a Master Distiller.
there's somebody else doing 95% of the work already, right?
Yeah.
So it's more or less the face of the brand, the marketing engine behind it. Maybe something that is a talking head when you go and you got to go across the country and push your whiskey, right? So they'll find somebody, but I think we could speculate all day and figure out what it is. Who just knows what is going to fit that Heaven Hill mold.
Right.
I think what's surprising to me though too is it shows the passion Denny has for just making bourbon for the masses, right, and for the mass level. Because he could have easily went independent, right? He could have become a consultant, started up a ton of different brands, and just went for it for a money play.
The next
right?
Dave Pick roll,
He could
right?
be, yeah, exactly. And he didn't. He went, back to an iconic brand. He's going to build that and continue to build it. And I think that says a lot about his character too, and like where he wants bourbon to go and what he's really into. So it'll be interesting.
Maybe you got more vacation days out of it.
Well,
too.
that might be the case too.
yeah.
401k. I mean, he evaluated all
You got
those.
5 more
What's
days.
the benefits look like?
And what's interesting, I mean, to piggyback on what I mentioned earlier, if you don't have that person as your icon, that's something that if they leave and people don't notice, it's much less of a hit versus, I mean, obviously
Right.
we all remember when Jim Rutledge,
Oh, yeah.
retired.
Right. When you put all your
from
chips
Four Roses,
with one
and
guy.
everybody
Yeah.
kind of like, it was this, okay, did they do something wrong? Was there wrongdoing? Why is there not a celebration bottle with his name on it? All the kind of speculation that went on out there. I think Four Roses really went on, defense and then offense. Okay, Brent Elliott, let's get him out there. Let's make this play. Let's get a bottle with his image on it. So you're kind of vulnerable in that case. If the Master Distiller isn't, part owner, really and have some control there, you're going to have that risk.
Right.
Which even is the more interesting part is like Four Roses more than probably Heaven Hill, that when you think about it, like you're not going to touch a drop that Brent has had anything to do with within this role for at least a little bit, right? Like this is all sort of the Rutledge era that everybody's still consuming, right? So you still got a little bit of a, I mean, let's be
Aside
honest.
from
Let's
blending.
be honest, everything's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
But it's just like something to just.
But if you want
Yeah,
to start stocking up on the Rutledge whiskey, you might want to.
But the thing is, Brent's
been
he's
there
just
for a
doing a
while.
recipe that's been
That's
there
true.
for
Yeah,
years.
10
Yeah. He's
years.
just
Brent's well, he's been
And
there a
then
long time.
I was just saying in that particular role.
in that
Yeah,
role,
that
you're
role.
right.
In
But
that
he was
role,
always
yes.
on the tasting panels for the
Exactly.
limited editions, small batches. So
Yeah.
he'd been working with Jim on those things.
he's not a
hand in
newcomer.
hand. right?
And quality control.
But
right?
distilling
You're
to
from
me is
quality
the
control.
easy part. I mean, it's an exact science. It's like a formula that you just do. The blending and putting it all together. That's where
That's
I think
an
the
art.
true magic.
Right.
That's an
is.
art.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about maybe this blend we have on the table here, because I think this is something that it's a treat, and I am going to let Brian do the honors of talking about it.
Okay.
And then if he feels fortunate enough that he actually wants to open this after this conversation, then we will.
I
pressure,
I think we'll
but-
definitely be open it. But so what was it, about 2 months ago or so on one of these episodes? We were talking about the Sazerac versus Castle and Key case, and we had Castle and Key was sued by Sazerac because Castle and Key owns what's historically known as the Old Taylor Distillery in Millville, Kentucky, and Marianne was able to mention that yesterday at Ryan's workshop because Castle and Key won the lawsuit. Castle and Key is now allowed to keep up the sign that says Old Taylor Distillery Company above the door. They're able to talk about the decades of history that Colonel Taylor had at that property. This is the property where he got the Bottled and Bond Act passed. This is the property where he created the Old Taylor brand. That's famous. He had spent some earlier time at the OFC, which is the property now where Buffalo Trace is. And Buffalo Trace, Sazerac bought the brand name from Jim Beam. So they own the Old Taylor brand. They, of course, have the much more popular Colonel E.H. Taylor small batch and single barrel. And they didn't want, they didn't like Old Taylor also being in Millville, I think is what it boils down to. So what I said a few weeks ago or a few months ago is that if the case wasn't appealed by now, by the time everyone was in for Bourbon and Beyond, if we it's got a little bit of glare on there, but if you can see the tax strip, this is a distilled in the fall of 1916, Old Taylor, and then bottled in 1933. So this would have been, people know more or less when Prohibition started. But what's not as well known is that distillation stopped before Prohibition came along because of the war, and distilleries were being converted into making alcohol for the war effort, not for drinking, but for use in the war effort. I don't know exactly what it was used for, but it's really hardcore.
Some kind of fuel. I
Yeah,
think, was
alcohol
was the concept.
Right. So distillation stopped before Prohibition. So this is going to be one of the last distillation runs by Colonel Taylor at the Old Taylor Distillery. And I was fortunate enough to get this bottle. It came in a box. Since it was sold, you could only have medicinal spirits. This is the maximum size you could be sold in. This is, you see at the bottom, it's the American Medicinal Spirits Company. They were a company that started from the Wathen family, and they bought up a lot of stored aged whiskey, and they were able to sell it as medicinal whiskey throughout Prohibition. So I've got the box. It's a full pint. It's 100 proof, bottled and bond, because of course that's what Colonel Taylor fought for, and I thought we'd be able to enjoy this at the round table.
Wow,
That's great.
Hey,
is
that's
incredible.
a treat. I'll let you do the honors and
I'll
start
turn the
doing-
mic off, and you guys.
We'll talk about it here for a second.
When I woke
because-
up this morning, I didn't think I was going to be drinking again.
but you know,
But I'm glad I am.
Funny how that changes.
Yeah.
We were all
going
gonna leave today, but then this came up. So.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Blake was actually at the airport.
This is a true story. This is a very
he
true
was
story.
actually at the airport. He was trying to bail out on us early, and then Brian sends a message. He was like, "Hey, I'm gonna bring this," and he's like, "Well, I'm on standby. I guess I'll come by." So,
My standby got mysteriously canceled.
yeah,
and,
right. But
so the
here's
streak continues.
So I think here's the other thing why this is a big treat, right? So yesterday, for anybody that was there at my rare whiskey talk, Did anybody else catch that when I had asked them? We were talking about vintage and dusty whiskeys, and it came up twice when I asked both Larry Rice. I think Drew as well. Drew as
He
well.
said a 1950 version of Old Taylor.
It was a 1940 or 1950, something like that. But Larry said his favorite was like 1910 or 1908 or 1916, whatever it was, right? So I think this is pretty much a treat for all of us to be able to do this, because I don't think it would have happened any other time unless they're gonna go and pay for
Astronomical amounts.
at Jack Rose or something like that.
What's
right?
It made it harder to open
what's-
in 1910.
What's amazing about this bottle is the fill level is fantastic too for a bottle that's been out.
Yeah, so if you're looking for a true dusty, a pre-prohibition or prohibition era bottle, what the guys mentioned about the fill levels, usually you'd be up higher than the shoulders, and this one is right about at the shoulders. If it's lower than this, chances are it's going to be oxidized and is going to have a sort of wet cardboard taste to it, meaning that the bourbon evaporated out, and that's going to be replaced with something, and that's going to be oxygen, and that's going to change your bourbon over time. You also don't know how a lot of these bottles have been stored. If they've been stored in an attic where it's hot, that's going to change it. If they're stored in the sunlight, that's going to change it. So you're taking a lot of risks when you're buying an old bottle. And the oldest one that I've had before this one was at a KDA event for a Bourbon Affair, where the Samuels family had found a bottle of T.W. Samuels, the old family brand. And they made a big to-do about it. The whole thing was at one of their houses, and they had it all set up. They had someone with practically white gloves on opening the bottle and pouring it for everybody. And it was awful. It was one of the worst things that we'd ever
I think
tasted.
Jane was
Now,
talking
did they
about
admit to that too?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody.
She's like, it tastes like shit.
Yeah, as soon as everybody tastes it, you start looking around the room, and everybody's like, "Oh, that's really bad." And
So there was a reason and a methodology behind the idea that Bill Samuels Sr. actually or his dad or whatever actually tore up the family
right,
recipe.
he burned it. They say
and,
that's part of the
made
legend.
a new one.
Well, it's that, and I think it turned. I mean, it probably wasn't that bad in whatever I forget how old it was. It probably wasn't that bad, but that's an example of one that over 100 years had turned. It oxidized, and it had that wet cardboard taste, and was awful. It was probably the worst whiskey I've ever had of any age, of any time frame.
And that
Hopefully this is
oxidation
not the
too.
case.
I mean, if you look at the amount of air in there, bottles have air in them. If they're sealed, well, there's only so much oxygen.
Right.
It's only going to interact so much.
Right.
Depending to how much you might move the bottle around, that kind of a thing. But if it's got that free flow of air, you're constantly replacing it with the new oxygen,
Right.
which
And
is going
it's
to
gonna kill your
cause that basically. So your reliance on your cork, of course, is very, very strong. You've heard those stories of people who just the cork apparently just shriveled up and
Right. You've got
dried
bad cork.
out, and those, because you don't store bourbon on its side either, like wine.
That's a great point.
But just came right out.
there it goes.
The cork broke.
So it was.
I got my finger on the.
Oh jeez.
Oh gosh! All right, so we need to go get a Band-Aid.
We'll work on getting the cork out.
I'll get a cork and some.
But a good sign on the cork breaking
Just the very tip
is
of the top.
is
so
it's
that's good.
just the tip that is that is broken off, and by being stuck in there, I think that should mean that we got a good seal.
I think that's a good seal
So I think that's a good sign rather than the cork
because there's definitely
falling
been
apart and falling into the bottle.
if you think of not even super old, but turkey bottles of the late 70s, early 80s, which are notorious for the cork breaking. Those corks break like
Oh yeah, and the old crows are like that too.
Right,
The
yeah.
Chessman's.
There's a knife there.
There's a knife.
Yeah, I mean, because that was a little bit of glue that was connecting the cork with.
Yeah,
that.
I think you're gonna be okay, Brian. I like Joshua Smith's idea. So drill a hole through the cork and throw a straw in it. So he would, but with straws being outlawed, it's just we probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah, you're
For
not.
the environment, we're not going to bring straws out.
We'll just chug it straight from the bottle instead, Joshua.
Uh-oh. That's why we brought the tweezers.
All right, good. That's loose, so it's a fragile cork.
So he said it's a fragile cork. So
It didn't fall in though. It looks like it's still in the neck,
Yeah, that's good.
but broken in a couple pieces.
Well, good thing
Oh,
is
okay, you got
Filter
the
it out a little bit.
tweezers.
this is
Now I know
How good were you at the
This is
game
like
of Operation?
I know. I was about to say that.
a glass or something.
It's pretty firm in there.
Yeah, it's so the cork is it's not pushed down into the liquid yet, but it's pretty firm there, and there's not enough room to get the tweezers on the other
suggestion
side.
would
Just push it
probably be
through.
push it through and filter it out pretty
Filter
quick.
it out.
Yeah,
You got to
You
filter.
got a
do a
decanter
setup?
that I can put it
yeah,
in.
I got
got
glasses. Let me get it
everything.
for you real
All right,
quick.
let's decant
This
it.
is riveting. But back to the question, Blake, what's the oldest bottle?
The oldest, I think it was 1912, but it was 1918, 1912.
Okay.
Tasted, had very heavy notes of mothball and dustiness. Yeah, some of I've had some that are from like the 30s and 40s that are really good,
Yeah.
but I feel like anything that I've had pre-prohibition, and I haven't had a ton of it, just probably 2 or 3 times, it's always been that really dusty taste.
No, so we poured it in the cleaned out larceny bottle. You see, it's got great color.
That is
and
great
we were
color,
watching
yeah.
pretty closely, and there was no loose cork that went into it. So we've just got the cork in the bottle of the old.
Well
Taylor
done,
bottle.
guys.
Which is a good sign
Well
too,
done.
because it
Right.
Yeah,
tells you
that is a good
cork
sign.
stayed pretty well together there in the neck.
Yep.
Well, here's the moment of truth,
Yep.
right? Let's
See what it tastes like.
we're
Cross
gonna-
your
we're gonna
fingers
cheers
and-
here.
I'm nervous.
Hopefully it's not wet and burnt.
Yeah. So I'll wrap it up real quick while Brian pours it out. I think the oldest bottle I had was a 1940s bonded bottle. It was good, but I can't imagine it's going to be anywhere close as good as what we're about to sip on. What about you, Nick?
You know, I don't have too much experience with older vintage bottles. You know, I live in Syracuse, New York. Something we really don't see, I think, up there too often. Yeah, I want to say I've had some old Taylors that have been, you know, 60s, 70s. Had a, I believe was it an Old Crow?
Oh man,
we had a
last
72
night?
or
It was-
73 Old Crow.
I
that
think it was
phenomenal.
1973. That was very good. That definitely resonated with me. How good that
well,
was.
if the nose is indicative,
so
of
just
anything-
Brian, thank you so much for doing
Initially,
this.
you don't get that dustiness, that you know, that
That is a
mothballing
nice
oldness.
nose. Yeah.
That is a
You don't get any funk on that.
Oh,
that's
man.
pure cherries and
I can smell
caramel
that
and
all
brown
day.
sugar.
Yeah, you're right. That brown sugar especially is.
It's got a great color to it too.
Yeah.
It's
Old 17 years, you know.
17 years of stored in Millville. It's a great brown color.
I just realized.
I keep smelling this.
Well, I actually went in and sniffed the microphone. I was like, which one do I have in my
Oh,
hand?
that's really nice.
That nose is
the
well.
microphone.
I knew,
This one survived.
This one held together.
Wow. I mean, that's
That is delicious.
And
That's
there's
spectacular
still some
bourbon.
finish. I took a sip 20 seconds ago. And
Oh,
it's
this is
still,
a nice long finish.
still there, but it's not a robust.
You can taste the bonded. You know the proof, the 100 proof.
I didn't know that was a thing. I could taste the
I can
bondedness.
taste the bondedness.
Hey,
taste the bond.
Oh my god! Can
we're
we
not-
Can we that our new T-shirt?
yep.
I can taste the bondedness.
These things just come. I don't know. They just come out of my mouth. I don't know what
they
to.
flow out. I don't know what it is.
The finish is still going, but it's a flavor finish, not a heat robust kind of. Some of those finishes, like an overproof Booker's 25th or something. I think the finish is so good because of the strength and how robust the whiskey is, and
I mean,
it's
that's
more of a
just-
burn. This is a flavor finish.
That is.
It's flavor throughout the entire sip. Great nose, great palate, phenomenal finish.
Because there's a little bit of the oak, little bit of the mineraliness on the finish, but it's still has a good
like
sweetness
raisins, a
and
lot-
fruit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, it's a lot of dried
See,
fruit.
Yeah.
Ryan's
A
calling
lot of-
out dried fruit right now.
Yep.
We have
Bondness.
the thing has evolved.
Wow, this is
Yeah, it's like a really nice raisin bran.
Man,
the best larceny I think I've ever had.
right.
yeah,
We just proved that larceny is better than makers.
yeah.
Heaven knows, got it
this-
right.
They did something right.
No, I'd say it's a good daily sipper though. So we'll be over tomorrow.
ISO.
time to cancel your next flight, right?
yeah.
So, we're kind of wrap this up here. So, I want to just kind of get in the middle and say cheers, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you, Brian.
This
Yeah.
was
Thank you very
this
much.
was an exciting opportunity that we all got to come together and do
Yeah.
this. B, that Brian was able to bring this and share it with us, because I think this is a true once in a lifetime kind of
Yeah.
opportunity.
And
right?
that-
100%.
That is a once in a
100%.
lifetime.
And I can highly recommend people either come to an event like this or like Bourbon Fest or just something.
Talking about Kenny's basement.
Well, yeah.
You definitely come to Kenny's.
I always send every time somebody, I'm like, let's go raid Kenny's bar. But just can recommend more to come to Kentucky or just any bourbon event and hang out with the community. Like, I mean, we joke we're internet friends. Our wives think we're all crazy, but it's just great to meet these people, and then like we met a lot of our listeners at the show, and like we're so appreciative, and like it was so cool. Like they're like, "You're Ryan." I'm like, "What?
What I do? Yeah.
Where's my wife? She's got to hear.
I saw you on the internet.
But it's just we all have this common thing of bourbon, but we meet so many great people, and it's such a blessing, like to be able to experience that.
Yeah,
it's
a great way of putting it.
And it's really cool. So I couldn't highly recommend coming to something like this and get involved with it.
Maybe there'll be a roundtable experience coming up at another bourbon event soon. We'll see. I don't want to tease that out just yet.
Take the show on the road.
That's what we were talking yesterday.
We got plenty of '90s rap music.
Because Blake was saying yesterday, he was like, we should dream big. What if we just had like our own tent for Bourbon Beyond next year? Right? Yeah, I was like,
why not?
We'd have to charge extra.
Old
I'm gonna need I need cash only and small bills, please.
But we typically go around and everybody says their goodbyes on where you can find everybody, but everybody knows Breaking Bourbon, bourbon.com, Sipping Corn, and make sure you give one more plug for your book when they can find it.
November 1st, Bourbon Justice, and it's on pre-order right now. And I saw it's on 33% discount. So order up, buy 2. That way you can keep one on the shelf. And
Christmas gifts are coming
increase.
up. Christmas is here, so why not just
value,
get multiple?
Secondary value.
That first edition.
Once you open your book, it decreases in value.
So buy 2.
So you need a second one to put on the shelf and display.
Right. So you can flip it.
And maybe flip it later.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. So guys, thanks again. This is a fun weekend, fun experience. Hopefully next year we can make 2 days out of it. Who knows what we?
I don't know if we can handle 2 days.
2 out of 3. That's a better percentage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's see if Fred invites us again. So let's say thanks to Fred.
Thanks, Fred.
Thanks, Fred.
I got blackballed after Friday night.
All right. Well, cheers, everyone, and make sure you follow Bourbon Pursuit on all those great places as well as these guys. And we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.